are recording, and so we will go ahead and get started. Today's topic is input and output, print statements and F strings, and then the input statement and practice getting input. For now, everything we're taking into the program will come from the keyboard. Everything that goes out from the program is being printed to the screen. Later on in the semester, we will learn how to read from files and write to files, but that's for a month or so away. For now, it's all keyboard and screen. So this is, I just put this up on the GitHub site about an hour ago. Normally I'm ahead of that, but I was fooling around with some stuff and lost track of time. Apologies. It is there now. Also there now, I put yesterday, is all the code samples that I did in Monday's class. And of course, the code that I write today in this lecture will also go there later on. Some administrative notes. Make sure you do all of your labs and homeworks. I hope everybody was able to get into your discussion section yesterday where the labs were assigned and discussed. Typically, those are going to be due Friday nights. So labs, normally, you'll get them in your discussion section on Tuesday. They are handed out by the TAs. Kevin and Mariah make them available to you on Tuesday, and you have to have them done by Friday nights. Typically, you get 2 points credit for checking in with your TA on the lab day during the discussion. Please, at least bother to show up. That's 2 free points. If there is some big crisis where you legitimately can't make it, then let your TA know. We'll deal with that. But please just at least show up, get the assignment, get the instruction, and then you can move on. The other 8 points for each lab are for doing it correctly. The main purpose for the labs is to give you practice and let you build confidence actually working through using the systems, Python, what have you, to solve some fairly simple programs. In general, we will have homeworks assigned, homework zeros out. That was simply to submit something that was a 10-point. The 50-point homeworks start coming out this Friday, the 5th. Those are typically going to be assigned on Fridays, and for the majors section, they have 1 week. They will be due the following Friday. For our section, homeworks are typically going to be due on Monday nights, the following Monday. I want the opportunity to have Monday's lecture and any office hours, etc., in case people are having specific problems with homework. So as I mentioned, homework 1 will be assigned this Friday, the 5th. It'll come out sometime in the afternoon, evening. I will put it in a couple of different places, and I'll put an announcement on Blackboard so you'll know where to look for it. You will have 10 days to do homework 1. It is not going to be due until midnight, the 15th of February, which is the President's Day holiday, I believe. But UMBC does not observe President's Day, so we're going to have class and it's due that night anyway. So you will have that homeworks are due 50 points each. You have 10 days to do them. And there are a number of problems. They're not too hard. We'll talk about it we'll talk about homework 1 on next Monday, the 8th, after you've had a chance to see it. At the beginning of the semester, homeworks are coming out pretty much every week. Friday the 5th, due the 15th. Friday the 12th, due the 22nd, and what have you. Then we hit a gap, and we focus more on programming projects. We'll get to them later in the semester. The programming projects are the big honking things that take a lot of time, a lot of hours, and a lot of effort, but they help you demonstrate your mastery of Python. And those are going to be due later in the semester. 2 and 3 are kind of close together, but that's because we're right at the end of the semester. And I may give you time into exam week for project 3, although I hope not. These are all the tentative dates, but that's our schedule right now. And again, you will have until Monday nights to do your homeworks. Typically, homework 0 doesn't count. It's a simple 10-pointer. We'll get them out there.
Professor, we were told
Yes,
by our TA homeworks are due Friday and labs are due Monday.
I will talk to them about that then. That is on me for not making it clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they were TAs for major sections last semester, so they're used to the majors things. I'll ping them. That's on me. Blame me, not them. But yeah, this is what it'll be. Okay. So that's but those are where the points come from. So make sure you do them. The tests will exist, but they're really not worth that many points. Let's move on to tonight's topic. What we picked up, well, quick review, because we're going to be showing these things in our code, so you should remember what they are. We're talking about variables. A variable is just a symbolic name. It represents something in memory. It has a type. The types we care about are ints, strings, floats, and booleans. And the variable has a value that can be changed. Variable names can consist of upper and lowercase letters, digits, and underscores. Will I put this info on Blackboard? Yep, will do. And you cannot start a variable name with a digit. We have a convention. It is not a Python rule. Your program would work. We have a convention that you use snake case for long variable names. That's underscores, not camel case. We talked about constants. Python does not truly support constants. That's something that's not going to change in the program, but we kind of fake it by using all caps with our identifiers. And literals, literally it means do this, use this exact value. If it's a string, it's in double quotes. If it's an integer, it's the number, and so on. Okay. I do look at chat, but I get behind sometimes when I'm in lecture, which is why it's better if you speak up and interrupt me. But I do try to look at chat, but I'm a little behind. Everything gets put on Discord. Look in the non-major section for pointers. Okay. Topic, input, output. Again, the Python default input comes from keyboard, output to the screen, and we're going to keep it that way. We'll talk about output first, and we'll talk about printing. The print statement, which we sort of talked about on Monday, is what puts output out onto the screen. You can print variables, you can print literals, you can print expressions that need to be evaluated. We'll talk about expressions tonight and also today and also Monday. You can print variables of any type we've covered so far. We're going to find later in the semester this is different from files. In printing to the screen, we can print all types, strings, integers, what have you. Let's talk about how things get formatted. Let's go to PyCharm first and do some examples. Now, what I'm going to do is, remember when you're using PyCharm, make sure I'm in the right place, sorry. File, new, a new file. I'm going to call it February, and actually spell February right, coding.py, so it'll be easily findable. I'll put a comment in there that says coding done in class Wednesday 2/3/21. Okay. Let's have some variable assignments. First, integer. Remember, single equal sign is assignment. Says first integer is a variable name. It's going to have the value 8. Second integer equals 42. First float equals 3.14159. First string equals Purdue football is terrible. Sorry, I have my master's degree for there. I'm not allowed to say that. I hate to say it, but it's true. All right, so now let's talk about printing. Print. Here's an example. All right. So now I'm going to run the whole code. So rather than just copying to the Python console at this point, I'm just going to run this, run February 3rd coding. And we can see that this program ran with the output. Here's an example. It printed this literal. Now, remember, you have to match up single quotes and double quotes. In this case, since with the literal, I used the double quote here at the end, I used the double quote here at the end. This single quote was just treated as an apostrophe. This was treated as an apostrophe right here. Okay. Now I'm going to start fooling around a little bit. I'm going to show how some individual things work. So I'm going to go back to my Python console. Print, here's an example. Okay, same thing. It just works. It prints that literal. Had I tried to do something with single quotes, now I have a problem because Python's going to tell me this is the start, this is the end, right? This single quote matches this single quote. Here I start with S. S isn't known. So this isn't going to work right. The red underscore, the red squiggly lines tell me that. And it tells me use invalid syntax. The reason it's invalid syntax is because I didn't match my single and double quotes. So I wanted to, okay, let's try to fix that again. Double quote there. Double quote there. And now we're back to this will work. That's an example of printing a literal. Now let's print variables. Print first integer. Okay. Oh, that's because I didn't run my first integer. Let's give all these values here. I had given the values in running the program. I had not assigned the values in the Python console. That was what led to that error. Okay, so now we'll come down here, and now I can execute the statement. Print first integer. And first integer is 8, and that's what Python prints. Okay, we'll talk about in a few minutes how many spaces it takes, left justification, right justification, what have you, but just to show that we can print an integer. Now, let's print second integer as well. We have loaded that value. And now we're going to print both of these statements together. And we can see that we got 8 and 42 on 2 separate lines. Now, key point to note, this is in the slides. The print statement, by definition, prints a new line at the end of every execution. So when print first integer executed, right here, when this statement executed, after it was done, it printed a new line character. It moved to the beginning of the next line. That's why 8 was on one line and 42 was on the other line. And you can't see it here, but there's actually another line here because after it printed 42, it printed a new line. So the print statement, by definition, prints a new line when it is done. Okay? What if we don't want a new line between these two? We want both values on the same line. Well, one way to do that is just combine them into a single print statement. Okay, that would be kind of an easy way to do it. Now, print the first integer, and then print the second integer. Okay, so we'll run that statement. And I have to copy the whole thing, or it's not going to work right. And here we can see that it printed the value of the first integer, which was 8, and then the value of the second integer on the same line. Now, and this is in the slides, and we'll go back through them to make sure we understand them. But what happens is here, if you notice, I said print this. I used a comma and then I said the second value. That comma caused one blank space to be printed between the two values. Okay. So when Python executes this, it prints this value as 8. And then it sees a comma, and so therefore it prints one blank space, and then it prints the second integer, 42. So this 8, this is a blank space between 8 and 42. This was inserted by Python because of the comma, and then it printed the second value, 42. Okay. Well, that's a case with integers. It's a reasonable thing. We can sort of guess at what kind of field size. Sorry, I'm scrolling up because I'm going to edit this in a minute.
Can I ask a quick question?
You sure can.
So one of the things, okay, so say you have two integers and you're saying like on the line print first integer, comma, second integer.
Right.
What if you want to have a comma in between the 8 and 42? So then it's like 8, comma 42. Because I tried to do that. That's one of the things in the that's one of the things I tried to do.
Right. I'll show you the answer right here.
Okay.
Here you go. The comma is the comma is a signal to Python. Now I'm going to print a comma literally as a string, and I'm going to use a plus sign. Okay. So what this does, okay, right, I'm mixing types. That's why I knew it was a screw up. Sorry. Here's your answer. If you want to actually print a comma, you have to insert the literal string comma. Okay. So what this does is it's going to print the 8, and then it's going to print the comma, and then it's going to print the 42. Now, if you want to print 8, no space, comma, no space, 42, you have to convert them into strings, and that's going to be about 10 or 15 minutes from now, so I'm going to ask you to hold off on that. But the answer is, if you want to print the comma literally, you have to do that by inserting the string literal comma. If you want no spaces, you can't actually do that printing integers. You have to convert the integer into a string, and then you'll do that. And I'll get to that in a minute. Okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, I only defined one string variable, so let me come define another string variable so I can illustrate this. String equals sad but true. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to print first string. I cannot type today worth it are. Like I said, live demos always, comma, second string. Okay, let's print that. I didn't run second string. Sorry. Here we go. Defined it and do it. Okay, now print first string and second string. Here, Purdue football is terrible. Blank space because of the comma. Second string. This is easier to illustrate with strings than integers. If I don't want a space in between the two strings, I can combine them with a plus. So if I say print first string plus second string, this is going to run the two together. Here, you can see where there's no space here. The E is the last letter in the first string, right? And the S is the first letter in the second string. Okay, so the value of first string, you can see the last letter is the E. The value of second string starts with an S. And so what happens is when you say print them with a plus sign, this says, here's the first string. Now with no space, immediately print the second string and then print a new line at the end of it. Okay, so that's the difference between saying print something, comma, something, and print something plus something. The comma always inserts the space. The plus does not insert the space. Okay. And that occurs whether we're talking variables, literals, what have you. There's the one with the comma again. Okay, so that's how we space things out. Is one way to space things out is to use the comma, not the plus sign. Now, the problem I have with integers, I started out showing you with integers and then realized it doesn't work right, is suppose I tried to do that same thing with integers. I tried to say print first integer plus second integer, just like I did with strings, and I hoped that would write. Well, guess what? Python says, oh, this is an integer, this is an integer, this is a plus sign. I know how to add two integers together, right? 8 plus 42 is 50. Integers add just like they do in your regular math classes, right? So the plus sign only works with strings. If you try to do it with integers or floats, Python does not assume. What? You mean I didn't have a second float? I didn't have a second float. Okay, I'll fix it. Okay. Here we go. There we go. Now we'll try printing first float or second float. And again, Python says, take 32.4, add it to pi. This is what you get. Okay. Anything that can be added, Python assumes that the plus sign means you want to add. It doesn't run them together. Now, how do you convert? You convert, well, you convert to strings by using str of whatever. So in other words, first integer we know is 8, str parentheses of first integer is the string 8. Python very helpfully put the single quotes around 8 to show me that this is a string. Remember, a string is one or more characters. It's not just letters. Digits are valid characters. So str is a string. That means I've taken the integer and told Python, treat it as if it was a string. Okay. If I do that now, I can say print string of first integer plus string of second integer. Now, this is going to be valid, and it will work the way I wanted it to, because Python now says, well, first integer is 8, take that as a string. Second integer is 42, take that as a string, and now just print string plus sign means no space between them, string 42, and now I get 842. So if for whatever reason I want to print these integer values with no space between them, I have to convert them to strings first. Okay. Now, I've got a whole lot of things hanging out here in this lecture that I need to get into, that I need to come back and show you. Okay. What I've done, and this is in the slides, is I've shown you that separating values in the print statement with a comma puts a blank space between them. Separating them or putting a plus in between them makes sure there's no space between them. But plus only works with strings. If you try to use plus with integers or floats, Python just does the arithmetic for you, and so you have to convert to string. Now, I've got some examples, though. I want to get back to Python, new line at the end of print by default. Okay. So we've talked about the example of printing first integer and printing second integer. One on the line. If I can't combine these into a single statement, because they might be in two different parts of the program, I can't combine them into a single statement. How can I get no new line in between them? Use the end equals argument. If I say print first integer, comma, end equals, stopping here, what happens is at the end of printing the first integer, there's not going to be a new line. So when I run these two statements, presuming I haven't made yet another error, you can see what happens. What happens is it prints the value of first integer, which is 8. And equals, stopping here, says instead of printing a new line when you're done with the 8, print the string stopping here. And I just did that to make it obvious, what's going on here. And now, continue with the next statement. The next statement says print 42. Well, we're right here, right? We're not at the beginning of a new line because there was no new line printed after this statement. There was no new line printed here. So when we got to here, we weren't at the beginning of a line. We were right here after the E, and so that's how you made it this way. So if you want two different print statements, but not the results on two different lines, you could use an end statement. Now, a more normal thing you would see is print first integer, and equals. Now a blank space, this is a blank space. It's just one blank space in between the two single quotes. And so that will print one blank space after the 8. So here, I'm going to print the 8. I'm going to print one blank space, and then on the same line, I'm going to print 42. Okay, and so that is a more normal thing. Obviously, you wouldn't use this stopping here phrase. I did that to illustrate what's going on. But this is how you make multiple print statements appear on the same line without having to run them into a single print statement. Okay, this is how you would do that. Is you could use an end statement. Now, suppose that instead of a single blank space here, I said and equals here. This is just the two single quotes with nothing in between them. That is an empty string. Remember, a string is 0 or more characters. A string of 0 characters long is an empty string. So literally what's happening here is Python is printing the 8 from first integer. Then it's printing the empty string. It is printing length 0, so it prints 0 characters. And then it prints the second integer, which is 42. So here is actually a way to get integers to appear butted up next to each other without having to convert them into strings. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know why you would ever do that in a Python program. I can't think of a case where you would actually want to run the integers together and make people think that this is 842 rather than 8 and then a 42 with an empty string between them. But you could. I mean, you could if you wanted to. I don't know why you would, but you could. That's one way of doing it. So what to take out of this? What you take out of this is that the end statement, the end argument in a print is used to print something instead of a new line at the end of this statement. So print everything here, then you would do this. You could combine them, obviously. You could say print the answers are first integer and second integer, comma, and equals done. And here we print out the literal. The answers are first integer, 8. The comma causes one space. So this, the answers are, the first space is caused by this space right here because it's inside the single quote, so it prints literally that. The second space here is caused by the comma. First integer, now we print the 8. Then the comma causes another blank space. Then I put a blank space inside my double quotes, so it's going to literally print that blank space, A and D. Then it's going to print another blank space because of this. Then this comma causes this blank space. Then 42 is the value of second integer, and then as soon as second integer, it prints the end statement, end equals done. Okay, so you can use end wherever, whenever, and you just get it done. Okay. Let me copy this and put it in the code. So when I share it to the GitHub site, you'll have it. I'll lose it. By the way, Python, unlike some other languages, is not restricted to an 80-character line. Lines of code in Python can be arbitrarily long. The actual length is going to be determined by what particular editor you're using, whether it's Emacs on GL or this in PyCharm or whatever. But Python language does not impose an 80-character line length limit. You can make the line as long as you want. Now, to make it readable, say by someone who's grading it or by a coworker or by your research professor or whoever, you're probably going to want to format lines, and we'll talk about how to do that later on. But Python, unlike other languages, does not impose an 80-character line limit. Okay. Now, I need to get back to something I've got in the slides, and that is Python defines certain special characters. The new line character itself is the backslash followed by n. So when I say backslash, that means the slash that goes from the top left to the bottom right. That's what we call a backslash. Backslash n is a new line. Now that is the case no matter what computer you're programming on. If you're programming on your Mac, if you're programming on Windows, if you're programming on the Linux box GL, anything else, backslash n, top left to bottom right, is always a new line. Tab is backslash t. Okay. Let's try this. Print first integer, comma, backslash n, comma, second integer. Let's see with our 8 and our 42 what that's going to produce. So come down here. This is 8. Python saw that and said backslash n, that is a new line. Go to the new line. There actually is a space after this 8 caused by the comma. Python said print 8, first integer, print a space because of the comma, print a new line. This comma makes it print another space, and that is why 42 is printed over here, second integer. So when you say backslash n in single quotes, Python, in a print statement, Python prints a new line. Now it has to be single quotes because that is a special case of a string. If I just said backslash n, you can see by the squiggly red lines, okay, Python's going to say, that's an error. I don't know what to do with this one. The syntax error message to me is not particularly useful. It says you've got a problem here down at the end. The issue is you got this backslash n. No. Okay. There have to be single quotes or there have to be double quotes. If you say print, try this again, first integer backslash t, I told you that's a tab, second integer, now this will print the two numbers separated by a tab. How big is a tab? How big is a tab? That one will depend on your Python implementation. Typically, a tab is going to be 5 spaces. It is not guaranteed to be. There are implementations of Python where tabs are 4 spaces. There are implementations of Python where you can set the value of a tab yourself. By default, in most cases, a tab is going to be five spaces, but don't count on that. Look at the implementation. But the bottom line is whatever a tab is defined as, you're going to get when you say \t in the print statement, you're going to get one tab in between the two values. Now, what if you actually wanted to print a new line? I mean, the \n in your output. The answer is you have to escape it. And you escape it by inserting another \. So the print statement \n that will print the \n. So if you want the \n characters to appear in your output, you don't want a new line, you literally want to see \n. The way you do that is you put a an extra \, before the n, and that will tell Python, hey, this isn't a new line, you literally want to see \n. The same with tab. If you want to see \t and not a tab, you have to escape it. You put that extra \. before it. Let me get rid of this. This is annoying. I don't care about the values of the variables right now. Okay. If you just say print \t, you won't be able to see it, but you've actually printed a tab. What was printed here was a tab because this is \t, as opposed to \t. That's a way of escaping it, and that says I've got a tab. Okay. Let's go back to the slides for now and see if I've covered most of the stuff I wanted to in the slides. Okay. Print puts the output on the screen. You can do variables. We've seen that, first integer, second integer. You can print literals, okay? The things in the quotes. You could print expressions. That was what happened when we showed the integer, the first integer plus second integer, right? Python said first integer plus second integer is an expression. It is 8 plus 42. I have to evaluate it. And so when I said print first integer plus second integer, Python said evaluate that expression. 8 plus 42 is 50. Print 50. You can print any of the types we've covered so far. I didn't show you Booleans, but you can print Booleans as well. Okay. Python has a whole bunch of different ways to display output. There's always an improvement. Literally, this is the fourth time I've taught this course in the last 4 semesters, and I'm going to teach output a different way each of the 4 semesters. The print statement that we've talked about so far is basic. You have to learn how the print statement works. When I get to the second part of this lecture, it's not real computer science-y. I'll show you how to do it, but you're not going to be responsible for it. You will be responsible for knowing how print works, that commas insert a blank space, pluses don't, new lines, how that works, etc. The second half of this lecture is not going to be on the exam. The basic print statement, separate values with commas or plus signs. Commas put a space between the values printed. Plus signs means runs them together with no space, but if you use plus with ints or floats, it's evaluated as it's an expression and evaluates it, and that's not what you wanted, so you don't do that. Print statement ends with a new line unless you explicitly tell it otherwise. You tell it otherwise with the end statement. The new line characters \n. When Python encounters in the print statement of \n, it prints a new line. Here's some examples that will work there. By default, again, it puts the new line at the end. If you don't want it, you use the end value. I use the end with a blank space. I use the end with an empty string. I use the end with the silly expressions. Yes, go right ahead.
So earlier, I'm sorry to go back, but earlier when you printed your statement with 42 and 8, there was no space between 42 and done. Why was that? Because you didn't put spaces in the single quotes?
I did not put spaces in the single quotes, right? And this end argument is a special case, so to speak. Specifically what you were talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about. Let's see if I can get back that far. Sorry. Flip it over. This is the one you were talking about here. Okay.
Oh no, earlier than that, I think. It was
Oh,
like
okay.
the sentence when it was like the answer is 42, 8 and 42, and then
Oh, got it. Okay, now I got you.
yeah, I was just confused because there was a comma, but there was no space printed.
Hang on. That was, let's see, this one? No, that's not. Hang on. Let me go back up here. I didn't get the whole thing. Go away. I don't care about the update. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is the one, right? The
Yeah,
answers are first integer and second integer with the end of done.
yeah, so why isn't there a space after or in between 42 and done?
Right. Because this end thing is a special case in Python. I don't know why, but it's a special rule. What it doesn't, it sort of ignores this comma. So Python, end is a special case. If it sees the end equals, it ignores the fact that there was a comma right here, and that it does not print a space because after that.
So why do you
Okay.
even need the end if um in the other comma spaces you just have the quotes?
Here, okay, I'm not sure which one you mean by have the quotes.
I'm saying like the answers are and in the middle.
Right.
Like those
Yeah.
are it prints those words anyway, so why do you need and at the for done?
Oh, you don't. I was just illustrating that you could use end with a long. All my other examples had end and one variable. And so I was just trying to illustrate that you could use end even though you had a whole bunch of stuff in the same print statement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, since you're right. That's a very good question, and please continue asking these questions. These are very good questions. This would only make sense really if I had another print statement after it. So to illustrate this, I should have had another print statement that started printing right here after done. So that's why. That would have made more sense if I'd done that. But yeah. So all right, good. Keep asking these questions. I like this. That is having a small class, as you can actually talk to people. All right. Getting back to the slide. So I think I covered everything there. Printing a new line character, that's the slash, the escaping that I just talked about. And now I want to get into the second part of this lecture, which is what we call what Python calls F strings. It's the newest and latest, greatest. Okay. As you may have seen, when you print things in Python using the print statement, by default, Python is going to take exactly as many spaces to print as there are characters of the string. Python will print exactly what's in the single quotes, exactly what's in the variable value, no leading spaces, no trailing spaces, no nothing. A string, Python takes exactly as many spaces there are to print out. And an int, Python is the same way. It will take exactly as many spaces as there are digits in the integer. Every time I printed 8 in PyCharm, it took 1 space. Every time I printed 42, it took 2 spaces. Okay? That's the default. A float, Python is going to print everything to the left of the decimal point. It will print to the right of the decimal point as many characters as you've got and up to 16 digits after the decimal point. Maybe you don't want that, but that's what it's going to do. And when you're printing a Boolean, Python takes 4 spaces for true and 5 spaces for false. And so what I mean by 16 spaces is if I want to print the floating point value 1/3, this is what you get. By default, Python will take 16 spaces. Okay. That's how many decimal places of precision you get. So when I say with a floating point, by default, Python is going to give you, it's going to give you everything to the left, and it's going to give you up to 16. Now, if there was not something 16 long, like if you looked at the floating point values I gave you in the earlier program, first float and second float, it didn't append trailing zeros, right? It didn't put trailing zeros at the end of the decimal. It's going to just print out the decimal places that you have and then stop. But it will give you up to 16 if you've got that many significant digits in your answer. So this is what Python does by default. And for a lot of cases, that's good enough. But we're going to be dealing with cases where you don't want that. You want to, output a table. You want things in columns. You want things lined up under. You only want 2 decimal places of precision because you're dealing in dollars and you just want the number of cents. You don't want to the 14th decimal place of cents. And so this is what I talk about when I say there's a whole different way to format out the new format introduced in Python 3.6. So if you're using 3.7, 3.8, or 3.9, which I mentioned Monday, you should. This should all be there. Is called F strings. It's the hot new toy. Somebody came up with a better new way of doing it. It's similar to string.format. If you Google how to format output in Python, a lot of places will show you string.format. F strings replaces that. It works kind of the same way. An F string starts with either a lowercase f or an uppercase F and puts everything you want in a string. If you have a variable name, not a literal, but a variable name, you put that in curly braces. Curly braces are these, Python overloads everything. We'll talk about it exactly. That variable is going to be evaluated when the statement is executed, and the actual value is going to be printed. Okay? Multi-line are allowed. We'll go over this in a minute. And the way you specify the field width is after the variable name or the literal value, put a colon and the minimum number of spaces you want to take up. Okay? And we're going to walk through a whole bunch of example. Python will always expand. It will never truncate. The big thing is that floating point, you can say, I only want 2. Okay. So the syntax is F, and then either single or double quotes, literals, and put your variable name in curly brackets. Let's go over here. Get down to the bottom of this so I don't mess the previous lines up. F strings. Lower or uppercase F. I normally use lower, but you could use either, and I will use upper on occasion. String, put either single or double quotes. Let's go with double quotes. Hello there. Curly brackets. These are these things. It's the shift of the square brackets. It's not a parenthesis. It's not a square bracket. It's the curly brackets. Sometimes these are called braces. I apologize if you've got a different vernacular. These are curly brackets. Hello there. First integer, colon, 5. Okay, I want to execute this statement. What this is going to do is going to print the hello there, and it's going to print the value of first integer, which is 8. So it takes 1 place, and it's going to use a minimum of 5 spaces to print it. All right. Execute. Copy, paste. Here you can see it prints the string hello there, which is what I typed up here. And then in curly brackets, it took the variable first integer and it said, give this to me in a minimum of 5 spaces. And so what it did is, you can look, it printed 4 blank spaces plus the 8 is 5. And it right justified. So F strings are a way of lining things up. The reason that might be relevant is the next statement here is hello there, second integer, also 5. Now I'm going to print both of these statements. Yes, question? I'm sorry, was someone speaking? I apparently managed to mess this up somewhere. Let's hang on. Okay. And now the second. Okay. The reason for doing it this way is now you can see that I can line these up in columns, and I have digit, least significant digit over least significant digit. The 8 is over the 2, and then the leading blanks are over the 42. So this is a way of lining things up so that if I'm printing a table, I'm printing columns, whatever, I can line up the digits, I can line up the strings. That's why we use the F strings. F strings are not, as I said, it's not a major point of computer science. F strings will not be on exams. It's not a major thing. It's just a skill we teach you that you could do, that you can use to line up your output, print things like that. Now, suppose that I wanted to print, we've already talked about printing. Let me do this as a variable. Okay. Let's print this. We showed what happened when we printed the floating point value 1/3. If I do it this way, I knew I was going to mess that up. Curly brackets and 5.2. If I do it this way, now I'm not going to be stuck with, try this again. Now I'm not going to be stuck with 16 digits. There we go. It's a pain in the neck to get these to execute. In this case, with a floating point number, it says take at least 5 spaces to print the whole thing. I want exactly 2 spaces after the decimal point. And Python will round. If you use F strings, Python will round this. It will not truncate it. 0.33 is the same, but if this were 2/3, 0.6667, this would be rounded to 0.67. It would be rounded, not truncated. 5 spaces says 1 blank space, 2, the 0 is the second space, the decimal point space, and 3 and 3, those are the 5 spaces. So what this says for floats is at least 5 spaces, exactly 2 after the decimal, round. Okay, and I want to cut back over to the slides because I'm running low on time and I want to get input. We can talk about F strings again. They're not part of the core computer science part of this course. They are a tool to make your output look pretty. They won't be on an exam. The print statement will be on an exam. It's important to understand that. But F strings are ways you can format the output a little bit better, so you don't have to have those hideous numbers of decimal places. You can line up your integers one under the other. You can print columns. Okay, so those are all output to the screen. Now back to something you do need to know of, and that's the input statement. We're taking input from the keyboard, and so since I've got 15 minutes, I want to cut that over. Okay, input is how you get input from the keyboard. The syntax is you have some variable name. It needs to be a variable name, otherwise it won't be stored anywhere, equals, because it's got to get an assignment. The value stored with this variable comes in from the input statement. Now, the way the input statement works is it will print a prompt to the screen. Whatever you type in here will be printed onto the screen. Then Python will stop. Python will quit executing your program and will wait for the user to enter whatever value is going to be entered. And when the user types new line, when the user hits enter, the carriage return, the new line, the enter, whatever you want to call it, then Python will execute. Continue executing the program with that value. The input statement. So let's come up with a new value. Data equals input. Please enter your name. Okay. Let's execute that statement. Python prints the prompt. Whatever's in between these double quotes, Python will print on the screen, and now it will ask the user. Now, PyCharm will provide a prompt to the user with a question mark that's kind of a hint you need to enter something now. It will take whatever I type until I hit new line and hit enter. Ow. And then Python returns. Taking it again, Al Arsenal. Python goes until you hit enter, until the user hits enter, until the user hits new line, until whatever. Python will take that in with the input statement. Now we have a variable. The variable is called data. Data has the value that the user typed in. Al Arsenal was the last thing I typed in. That's the last thing I run. And Python says this is a string. So what you need to know about the input statement is, number one, it's how you get data from the user at the keyboard. Input gets data from the user at the keyboard. The second thing you need to know, it has a prompt that will be printed. So anytime you have a useful program, this prompt will be specific enough to tell the user, this is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting your name. It will be, something that says, I want a reasonable value. When this is executed, this value will be assigned to this variable. Now, everything is a string. Number equals input. Enter a number between 1 and 10 inclusive. Okay. Print number plus 5. Remember, I can print an expression. I want an integer. I want to add 5 to it, and I can print it. So what I'm going to do here is tell the user to enter a number between 1 and 10 inclusive. When the user enters that, I'm going to try to add it to 5 and print out the result. Okay, remember now, after printing this prompt, Python stops. This line of code has not been executed because Python stops right here and is waiting for me to hit the number and new line and enter. Okay, so I am right here. My favorite number is 4. So let's enter 4. And wait a minute. Now I've got a problem. I got an error when I tried to add 4 plus 5. Now, 4 plus 5 is 9. Python should be able to do that. We as humans can do that easily. Therefore, we've got a problem. It gets back to this comment I made in the coding, which is also in the slides. Everything that comes in from input is a string. Input is only capable of taking in strings from the keyboard. That's why it takes everything until you hit enter, until you hit new line. It takes it in and it reads it in as a single string, 0 or more characters. Okay? But I don't want it to be a string. If you don't want it to be a string, you have to convert it. You have to cast. Cast means convert it to a specific type. Okay, earlier in this lecture, we talked about converting to a string using str. To convert to an integer, we use int. So now, number equals int of input, enter a number between 1 and 10 inclusive. Okay, and we have to make sure that we've got balanced parentheses, which we do. Now, print number plus 5. Okay, what this does, using int, says cast it, convert it to an integer. What's going to come in is a string. Four. The string 4 is going to come in, but using the int, Python will convert it to an integer, and the number, the variable number, will have the integer 4, and now I can do the arithmetic, and I print out the answer 9. Why? Because number was an integer, and it has the value 4. So input. The next thing you need to remember about input is that everything that comes in from input is a string. If you don't want it to be a string, you have to convert it. You have to cast it. That was how I cast it to an integer. If I want to cast it to a float, I say float of input 4. And now, remember, floats have things after the decimal point, so it says this is 9.0. Because when I said float, it converted my string of 4 to 4.0. So everything that comes in with input is converted to, is a string. Everything that comes in with input is a string. And if you want it to be another type, an integer or a float, you have to convert it. You have to cast it, is the term we use. Okay. The last point I want to make about input, and then we'll go back and double check the slides, is the prompt has to be a single string. Number equals input enter a number. Now, unless Python, the latest version of Python, has changed this, this should fail. There we go. Okay. The reason that failed, I was concerned because Python didn't bother showing me that this was an error with the little squiggly red lines underneath it, but this is the way Python is supposed to work. Your prompt in your input statement, this prompt has to be a single string. If you try to build a prompt out of something else, it's going to fail. You're going to get this error message. Input expected at most one argument says input expects the prompt to be a single string. You got 3 because there are 3 strings here. That doesn't work. Now, you can build using variables. Prompt equals the string, enter a number. And then you can say number equals input prompt. This will work fine because this is a variable. It's a single variable that has a value. You can go find the value, print the string, enter the number, and now it worked fine. So let's go back to the slides, make sure we've covered everything. What do you need to know about input? It has this syntax. When the prompt is printed, the program stops until the user finishes typing in the input and hits the new line and hits the enter. Everything that comes in is always a string. If you want to convert it to something else, you have to cast it using int or float. Okay, so if you're going to have the user type in, you know, what's your GPA or what's your this or what's your that, remember you have to convert it to the right type. Everything in this prompt has to be a single string. It can be a literal. This is a string literal. It can be a string variable. That will work too. There can only be one of them. Okay. The prompt can be a literal or variable. Gosh, I just said that. It must be a single string. Yep, just said that too. You can only bring in one value per input statement. This is going to be true for now. This is going to be true for now. Later in the semester, we'll work out how to deal with this. But what's going on is you are, with one input statement, bringing in a value to one variable. So if you need the user to provide multiple values, if you're asking the user enter your name, enter your major, and enter your GPA, you're going to have to use 3 separate input statements. One that says enter your name and stores it somewhere. One that says enter your major and stores it somewhere. One that says enter your GPA, converts it to floating point and stores it somewhere. One value per input statement. And we'll cover how to get multiple ones, but that's kind of a kludge, so we don't do it right offhand. So IO, O, output, print statement, learn that, it's on the test. F strings, fancy your output control, columns, tables, not so many decimal places. It's a handy skill to know, won't be on the test. We just provide it as an illustration. You are free to use F strings in your projects, in your homework, in your labs. They're okay. You're just not required to. Okay. Input. The input statement from the keyboard, everything's a string, convert, one prompt, and the program will stop. And my last slide says now we go to PyCharm and did the examples, but I already cut to the examples because, as I said, you don't want me doing this class just reading slide after slide after slide. It's boring for everybody. I think the illustrations with the code is a better examples. I appreciate your questions. I'm serious about that. The more interaction we have, I mean, that's the biggest loss to me of going online is it's much harder for you to ask questions and much harder to have an in-class discussion. We'll do the best we can. With that, my time is up. I am available for questions if you have any. I don't have any conflicts this afternoon, so I'll be here as long as you want. I'm going to stop recording so that your questions will not be recorded, so don't feel self-conscious about having your questions captured on the YouTube channel. It won't be. The YouTube will be out later on today, later on tonight. Like I said, WebEx usually takes a while to get going, but I will stop recording now and be available for any questions you have. So fire away.
Go ahead.